Simply not being a god impersonating madman who fed people poo would have been an... What am I doing with my life? What's that smell? Oh god, it's my socks. Ugh. And it also distracted them from the recent results in I'm never going to finish this video. Hello everyone and welcome to The World View. My name is Aaron Chandler Blake and this is the first ever episode of Overlooked History. Before I go any further, I just want to say that this new series won't have any impact at all on my current Debunking Tartaria series. I still plan on finishing that, as I said before, and once that series has concluded, I will continue to make Tartaria debunks. So with that out of the way, let's focus on what's important today, Overlooked History. Like I said, this is a brand new series to the channel, and even though the title is probably pretty self-explanatory, I want to take a moment to explain the concept of this new series to you before we get going. Everyone in the world should be aware of historical figures like Genghis Khan, Alfred the Great, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, and many others who shaped the world we live in today. Good or bad, these people are still prominent names in modern times, but there are several other names from history that have fallen away from common knowledge and no longer get the respect or resentment they deserve. For example, we rightfully celebrate the likes of Nelson Mandela for their freedom-fighting accolades, but Steve Biko, who fought against the exact same system and died in the same cause, does not get the same recognition. People like Pol Pot and King Leopold II are judged harshly, yet names like Alexei Yermolov seem to avoid the same fate. Further still, people like George Washington and Gandhi get their flowers for standing up to colonial powers, yet other people that did the exact same thing are completely forgotten. In this series, I'll be studying the moments, movements and people from our past that are glazed over or ignored, to shine a light on the hidden names that have changed the course of history. Overlooked History is going to be a huge series. I've already got about a dozen video scripts written and ready to go, and I've got a couple of dozen other scripts on the back burner I need to keep working on, but they should be ready soon. Though it is great having potentially years worth of content ready to go, it did cause me a problem because initially I had absolutely no idea how to structure this series or how to start it. Originally I was going to include people in the order of their birth year, but this is difficult because there are some people in this series that we don't know the exact birth year for. And then the other issue is if I want to add people throughout the series and I've already gone past their birth year, then I can't include them. So that wouldn't work. Then I thought I could do it by region. But obviously this starts to get a bit difficult once we get into eras of people like Mongol commanders and colonial rulers who are present over huge areas. So doing it geographically, again, probably not a good idea. So instead, I'm just simply going to alternate between the most famous and the least famous people on my list. I'll do an episode or two on people that most of you will recognise by name, but you may not know many specific facts about their life, and then I'll follow that with a name that could be completely new to several viewers. I'll also be planning some mini-series within the Overlooked History series. So for example, I've got like a 3-part mini-series planned about some Mongol commanders, which I think will be pretty cool. But I've not finished writing those videos yet, so I'm not sure when they'll get to you. Hopefully before I die of old age, but we'll see. Joking aside though, I obviously want to make a really strong start to this series because it could be a big running theme for my content for a very long time to come. And what better way to start off a history series than by looking at the Roman Empire. Roman leaders like Caesar, Marcus Aurelius and Nero get their fair share of airtime. Another name that should be on a similar level seems to get overlooked. Despite the fact most people have heard of him, most people don't know much about his life, his influence or his legacy, which can still be seen in parts of the world even now. Today's subject is Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian is surely a name most British people are familiar with thanks to the massive wall that was named after him. Hadrian's Wall, the Great Barrier that once marked the edge of the Roman Empire, can still be seen in places along the English-Scottish border today. Besides the wall though, Hadrian is also responsible for rebuilding the Pantheon, which is now the most well-preserved Roman building on Earth. But the man behind these buildings is often disregarded by the tourists who flock to his monuments. Hadrian was a well-liked and very progressive leader, even by today's standards. He was also part of the 5 Good Emperors line, alongside historical powerhouses like Trajan and Marcus Aurelius. But in spite of his achievements in infrastructure, architecture and social life, Hadrian's reign was tainted by personal grief, and in his later years a genocidal mean streak. Now I know what you're thinking, why did Hadrian's people consider him a good leader if he committed genocide? Well, first of all, you need to remember this is the Roman Empire. Committing genocide was one of their favourite pastimes. In fact, some historical scholars like Ben Kiernan argue that Rome actually invented genocide with the sack of Carthage. Little fun fact for you. Maybe fun's not the right word for that. Besides that though, you need to look at who came before and after the Five Good Emperors line to understand why Hadrian was such a contemporary favourite. The emperor before the Five Good Emperors line was Domitian, who a lot of historians put alongside Caligula and Nero as the cruelest Roman emperor of all time. Domitian became emperor after his brother, Emperor Titus, died just 2 years after taking the throne, and some contemporary sources suggest that Domitian may have had a hand in this. While Titus was friendly and cultivated, Domitian was a cruel egomaniac. He insisted that he be called master and god at all times, and when he hosted games every 4 years like the Greeks had, he insisted that the judges wore crowns that depicted an image of him alongside the gods. Domitian also had several members of the Senate assassinated and executed anyone who even vaguely criticised him. Even before he became emperor, he was a problem, as he needed an official pardon from his father after he tried to hijack a military campaign in the Rhineland in 70 AD and claim it as his own. And when Domitian returned to Germany in 83 AD, he personally oversaw the military campaign that committed several atrocities against the chatty people. However, Domitian was also hated by the aristocracy, which means that a lot of the contemporary sources we have about him could be biased. And many of the contemporary sources that we have now actually came out just after he died, a lot of which from senators who wanted to get the last laugh. However, it's still very obvious that Domitian ruled with an iron fist and was incredibly unpopular, and when he was assassinated, even his own wife joined in. Then directly after the Five Good Emperors line, we had Commodus. If you want to know what Commodus is like, just try to imagine a cross between King George the Mad and Joffrey from Game of Thrones. One of Commodus's favourite pastimes was murdering people. During his reign, he murdered a lot of people pretty much because he enjoyed it, and he particularly enjoyed killing people that were noble and handsome. Well, at least I know I would have survived. Commodus had a deep distrust for the Senate, and when a man tried to assassinate him allegedly on behalf of the Senate, he had everyone he suspected of being involved murdered. After this, he then banished and murdered his own wife, and it's also rumoured that he used to have people executed so he could steal their money and use it to build statues of himself. He also liked mixing his own feces with expensive food and then making people eat it. To top it all off, he also thought he was the reincarnation of Hercules, and once gathered all of the people in the city of Rome with no feet together, attached pictures of serpents to their legs and beat them to death with a club. Most powerful empire in the ancient world, by the way. The point of this isn't to show you how mental a lot of Roman emperors were. The point is to show you why the stability and the prosperity of the Five Good Emperors was so appreciated. Simply not being a god impersonating madman who fed people poo would have been enough to win over the Senate, but as we'll come to see, Hadrian did far more than that. Born in Italica in 76 AD, Caesar Trajanus Hadrianus Augustus, or Publius alias Hadrianus if we're to use his original name, although both names just roll off the tongue, was the son of a well-respected Roman senator and soldier. There are some disputes regarding Hadrian's birthplace, with a few people putting in an argument for Rome, but the evidence and consensus does tend to favour Italica. In spite of his reputation as a powerful ruler, Hadrian's life was tainted by grief from a very early age. Hadrian's father died when he was just 9 years old, and he ended up in the care of two high-ranking officials within the Roman Empire. His cousin Trajan, remember this name for later, and Achilles Antinous. Hadrian completed military training and became a keen hunter before things picked up in 91 AD when Hadrian was named as a consul to the Roman Empire. Because of this, Hadrian found himself involved in politics and essential military action. Amazingly, Trajan became Roman Emperor in 98 AD when he was selected as the successor to the aging Emperor Nerva. As it would turn out, this twist of fate would end up benefiting Hadrian as well. Under Trajan's rule, Hadrian prospered and he quickly rose through Rome's social ranks. He was a well-liked figure in the Roman establishment, but he was a particular favourite of Trajan's wife, Plotina. This respect earned him the right to marry Trajan's grandniece in 100 AD, but that wasn't really the blessing it seemed. First of all, Hadrian and Trajan were cousins, so that means he and Sabina were actually related. Also, Hadrian hated women, and even to the most casual observers he was very obviously gay. And even while he was married, he continued to have relations with a lot of the young men in Trajan's circle. I mean, Hadrian was a big fan of the Greeks, so is anyone really surprised by this? However, Hadrian's marriage did allow him to hold some junior offices and some military posts, which gradually brought him closer to the imperial court. Thanks to these connections, Hadrian became a consul at just 32 years old, a rise to fame that was almost unprecedented at the time. Strangely though, Hadrian's momentum seems to have stagnated, and finding hard facts about his life for the next 10 years or so is a bit difficult. This kind of stagnation wasn't uncommon for men of Hadrian's age in this era of the Roman Empire, and it seems even future emperors couldn't escape that hex. However, this is what we do know. Hadrian's role as consul was solidified by his status as a key figure in Trajan's inner circle, and this tie was strengthened by his marriage that everyone except him seemed to care about. Anyway, over the next few years he consolidated this position by filling a number of advisory roles to Trajan, while also building a reputation as a cultured man thanks to his interest in ancient Greece. I wonder what aspect of ancient Greek culture he was most interested in. Between 112 and 114 AD, Hadrian started to move into more pivotal and senior military roles, especially in the east as tensions with Parthia began to heat up. These tensions led to Trajan's Parthian War in 114 AD, where the Roman Empire launched a full-scale invasion against Mesopotamia. The conflict of Parthia quickly turned into a bloody stalemate, with bodies piling up on both sides. But Rome struggled to send enough troops to establish a foothold due to a Jewish revolt in the Middle East. Because of this, Trajan failed to take Hatra, a key city in the conflict, and was forced to withdraw to Syria. Despite this setback though, Trajan did still manage to annex a number of areas in Mesopotamia and Armenia during this conflict. Hadrian really benefited from all this though, as he was made governor of Syria in 115 AD, which put him in charge of a crucial province for the war effort. His time as governor earned him experience managing several legions at once, and it also earned him crucial support and respect from the military. The next major event in Hadrian's life came in 117 AD, when Trajan travelled west for diplomatic duties. As it turned out, Hadrian would never see Trajan again. While Trajan was touring modern Turkey, he fell sick and tragically died just a few days later. Trajan, though, officially passed succession to Hadrian by adopting him as his son just 2 days before he died. According to the biographer Cassius Dio, Hadrian dreamed that a fire descended out of heaven, the day being perfectly clear and bright, and fell first upon the left side of his throat, passing then to the right side, though it never frightened nor injured him. Then the following day, on the 11th of August 117 AD, Hadrian was made Roman Emperor. But there are some suspicions surrounding Hadrian's succession. Firstly, Trajan died miles away from Rome in a small town called Selinus, and very few people were present for his death. Not even Hadrian was present for Trajan's death, as he was still in Syria. Next, rumours swirled that Plotina had forged the adoption documents to make sure that Hadrian succeeded her husband as the Roman emperor. After all, Plotina had always been incredibly fond of Hadrian, and the rumours are only strengthened by the fact that Plotina personally announced the adoption. It becomes even fishier though when you realise all other claimants to the throne were either executed or assassinated within months of Hadrian becoming emperor. For example, Lucius Quietus, a senior general who commanded alongside Hadrian in Trajan's Parthian War, was a strong contender due to his decorated military background. Once Quietus successfully ended the Kittos War in Judea, he was suddenly executed when Hadrian became emperor. And the circumstances surrounding his death do make it seem like Hadrian was involved. In Hadrian's defence, we don't have any solid proof to suggest that he was directly involved in the execution of Lucius Quietus. However, we do have plenty of evidence that suggests he was directly involved in the assassination of his other political rivals. These included a senator named Gaius Avidius Nigrinus, who was executed early into Hadrian's reign on suspicion of conspiring against the emperor. Then a former governor named Publius Cornelius Parma, another fantastic name, also got taken out early into Hadrian's reign, as he too was accused of conspiring against the emperor. Finally, a two-time consul, Lucius Publius Celsus, honestly at this point I'm surprised Biggest Dickus hasn't cropped up, got executed around the same time, as he too was listed in the same conspiracy as Parma. So thanks to a couple of swift motions and convenient deaths, Hadrian suddenly found himself the most powerful man on earth with no rivals to his power in sight. Despite all of this shady business though, it is very likely that Hadrian was picked by Trajan to succeed him. This is because Hadrian was not only Trajan's cousin, but Trajan had effectively raised Hadrian as his own son anyway. Hadrian is now emperor, so what happened next? Almost as soon as Hadrian took charge, he provided what is arguably his most enduring contribution to the world, the Pantheon. It's worth pointing out that Hadrian was not the mastermind behind the Pantheon, and had actually already been burnt down twice by the time he became emperor. The first Pantheon was built in around 26 BC, but burned down in 80 AD, and the second was burned down in 110 AD by guess who? Domitian. Construction of the new Pantheon started in 118 AD and took 7 years to complete. It was built on the same spot as the other two Pantheons, and it's the only ancient Roman building in the world that remains almost entirely intact. Even though the Pantheon still stands, it was converted to a Christian building and renamed after the remains of several Christian martyrs were moved there in the 7th century. The famous architect Raphael, who was largely responsible for Renaissance architecture, was inspired by the Pantheon and is also buried there. Besides architecture though, Hadrian was still a pivotal emperor in Rome's history, and foreign policy was one of his most defining standpoints. In a reign that's noted for reforms in military strategy, Hadrian wasted no time in repositioning the Roman army. In complete contrast to Trajan, Hadrian refused to expand the empire any further and immediately ended all of their external conflicts. Instead of attacking, he positioned the Roman army to be more defensive and immediately set about defining Rome's borders. For example, Hadrian ended Trajan's Parthian war within days of taking power. He withdrew all Roman forces beyond the Euphrates River and established Syria as the new Roman frontier. Expansion had been the name of the game for the Roman Empire pretty much since day one, so when Hadrian decided to flip the script, it caused a bit of a stir, and it's probably worth explaining why he did this. And there are a few reasons for this. First of all, he believed that the Roman Empire was becoming too large to be ruled by one single person. He also thought that continued expansion without consolidating control in new territories would lead to more uprisings and also spread the Roman army too thin. These fears were highlighted for Hadrian when he saw Trajan struggle to quell the Jewish revolt in the Middle East and invade Mesopotamia at the same time. It was also difficult to coordinate soldiers over such a large area, and communication became increasingly difficult as the empire expanded. This switch to a more defensive strategy would prove to be effective for Hadrian, as when revolts did appear in the Roman Empire within his reign, he was able to quickly, and in some cases quite brutally, suppress them as he had more troops available. Hadrian then significantly increased his popularity with the people when he formally cancelled all debts to the state in 118 AD. This was a pretty controversial decision as far as the Senate was concerned, but it allowed Hadrian to win support from the public, and it also distracted them from the recent revolts in Judea. Meanwhile, his military exploits made him very popular with the military, and his trust for them meant he would eat and sleep in common quarters with the soldiers while he was on tour. I bet that's not the only thing he did with the soldiers. In 121 AD, he began a western tour of the empire where he covered Gaul, Germany and finally Britain, where construction for his famous wall began in 122 AD. Hadrian built many frontiers across the Roman Empire, but none of them are as famous or as iconic as Hadrian's Wall. This was an incredible feat of Roman engineering, and the entire 73-mile wall was completed in just 6 years. The position of the wall was calculated in detail before construction to make the most of any crags or hills, while also avoiding any topographical features that would be challenging to build on, like cliff faces or dense woodland. For example, parts of the wall were built on an area called Wind Sill. And again, that is called wind sill, not windshield, like one of my history students wrote in their homework a few years ago. Never forgot that. Wind sill is made from a hard rock called dolerite, which is incredibly resistant to erosion, meaning it formed a natural barrier several meters high, making it a perfect spot for a huge defensive structure. Originally, the Romans intended to use the dolerite from Wind Sill to build Hadrian's Wall, but when they found it too hard to cut into blocks, they decided to use locally quarried sandstone instead. Meanwhile, a stone shortage on the western side of the wall meant a lot of it had to be built out of compacted turf. The tallest part of the wall reached 5 meters high, and the rest of the wall was a uniform 3 meters wide for all parts that were made of stone. As the building progressed, the 15,000 workers had to start using scaffolding and pulleys to lift the top blocks into place. Sentries that completed sections of the wall recorded their progress by making an inscription on one of the wall stones. Many of these can now be found in the Chester Roman fort. While other megastructure builders of the past are treated quite poorly, the builders at Hadrian's Wall lived a pretty comfortable life. Well, about as comfortable as it could get for 2nd century Britain, but you get my point. They drank posca, which was a mix of water and red wine, while they ate hard cheese made of goat or sheep milk, flatbread and meat that had been salted to keep it fresh. Amazingly, there are no recorded deaths in the construction of Hadrian's Wall, but it's almost certain that someone died considering there were 15,000 people moving heavy stones around every day for 6 years straight. However, there definitely wasn't a catastrophic death toll like there was for other megastructures of the past like the Great Wall of China. Unlike the Great Wall of China though, the actual peak of Hadrian's Wall was pretty short-lived, as Antinous Pius established a new frontier further north in Britain just 4 years after Hadrian had died. However, the remains of Hadrian's Wall are a clear example of just how efficient and effective the Romans were when it came to engineering. Anyway, back to the man himself. The Romans' reputation for developing culture and improving everyday life is partly thanks to Hadrian. During his reign, Hadrian drastically improved the infrastructure in Egypt and even built a brand new city there called Antinopolis, but we'll come back to that one later. Meanwhile, he also improved infrastructure in other areas of North Africa, the Balkan Peninsula and especially Greece. Athens in particular had an incredible fondness for Hadrian, and this was shown when the residents of Athens built the Arch of Hadrian in 131 AD. This arch, built to resemble a Roman triumphal arch, includes inscriptions which seem to equate the Roman emperor to the city's founder, Theseus, showing just how much the Athenians respected him. Hadrian was also emperor when the construction for the Temple of Zeus was finally completed. It took over 600 years to build this monumental temple, and despite the huge effort that went into it, it only stayed active for 140 years before it got raided by Germanic tribes in the 3rd century. But of course the Athenians didn't know that at the time, which is why they praised Hadrian so much for finishing it. Hadrian's story really picked up in 123 AD though, when he travelled to the province of Bithynia, where he had funded some repairs after the area had been struck by an earthquake. While in the city of Claudiopolis, or possibly Nicomedia, Hadrian met a young man called Antinous who would inadvertently become one of the most revered people in all of ancient Rome. Antinous was no older than 15 when he met a then 47-year-old Hadrian. This rightfully sounds very weird by today's standards, but in Roman times relationships like this weren't frowned upon, and in fact they were quite common, especially between two men. A lot of these kinds of companionships were quick flings, but Hadrian and Antinous quickly found themselves in a very committed relationship, and toured and lived together almost constantly for the next 7 years despite the fact Hadrian was still married. The relationship was modelled more on the Greek style rather than the Roman, with Hadrian casting himself the role of the lover and Antinous being his beloved. Hadrian could have easily used Antinous, but instead he chose to help Antinous' intellectual and moral development, which cultivated a deep bond between the two of them. The only extended time Hadrian and Antinous spent apart from each other was 123 to 125 AD, when Hadrian arranged for Antinous to attend a prestigious boarding school in Rome. After this though, Hadrian fully adopted Antinous as his beloved, and they remained inseparable pretty much from this point onwards. But at some point in the next year or two, Hadrian's health started to suffer because of an illness that remains unknown even today. This would trigger a chain of events that would not only change Hadrian's entire life, but they would also completely change the religious dynamic of the entire Roman Empire. The health issues are the first sign that everything in Hadrian's reign wouldn't be smooth sailing, and this is made even more obvious when a new name appeared on the radar. I'd like to apologise in advance for the way I'm about to pronounce this guy's name. I did look it up and I'm pretty sure I've got it right, but given my track record in the past, there's also a very good chance I've not got it right. Hadrian was pretty well known for posturing, but he may have met his match when he came across a man named Pharasmanes II. It all started in 129 AD, when Pharasmanes II, the current ruler of the Kingdom of Iberia, refused to pay homage to Hadrian in Rome. Pharasmanes decided to stay in Muxgeta instead of travelling to Rome, which is seen as a diplomatic low blow at the time, and Hadrian simply wasn't going to stand for it. Especially since the Kingdom of Iberia was a client state to Rome at the time. To make matters worse, Pharasmanes has extended Iberia's territory to the Black Sea, in a period where Hadrian had quite explicitly said the Roman Empire was not going to be invading new territory. Many Roman leaders were notorious for their pettiness, and obviously Hadrian would be damned before he missed the opportunity to get onto that list. Pharasmanes, either as an apology or to mock Hadrian, sent the emperor 300 gold embroidered robes after he allowed the Alans to pass through Iberia so they could raid Roman territory. In response, Hadrian clothed criminals in the robes and paraded them around the Colosseum, mocking the king's gift and openly undermining his authority. This gesture sent shockwaves through the Roman Empire, and many people viewed it as Hadrian directly challenging the power and authority of Pharasmanes. And even though the Iberian king was praised and respected by other important Roman figures, he never truly got Hadrian back for the cloak parade. But Pharasmanes was soon proved to be the least of Hadrian's problems, as the emperor's entire world fell apart in 130 AD. Hadrian, who was still struggling with his health at the time, embarked on the tour of North Africa with Antinous at his side, and the pair arrived in Egypt for the festival of Osiris in October 130 AD. What should have been a run-of-the-mill formality turned into a complete disaster when Antinous, Hadrian's beloved, drowned in the River Nile. Despite a number of arguments being presented by historians, no one truly seems to know exactly how or why Antinous drowned. At the time, Hadrian himself officially classified Antinous' death as a tragic accident, but as Cassius Dio points out, Antinous would have had guards with him at all times who surely would have saved him if he fell into the Nile by mistake. Instead, Cassius Dio suggests that Antinous actually sacrificed himself to save Hadrian from the disease that had been troubling him for years. Dio's claims are supported by the couple's trip to Heliopolis just before they arrived at the festival of Osiris, where they apparently met a priest on mystical rites. There's speculation that the priest may have told Hadrian that he had been cursed, and Antinous decided that he had to sacrifice himself to break that curse. However, others suggest that Antinous actually killed himself out of jealousy, as he believed that Hadrian was starting to care more about his wife than he did him. This seems less likely though, because as we've already established, and I cannot stress this enough, Hadrian hated women. So the chances that he loved Sabina more than Antinous are pretty low. However, it's reported that Hadrian's health didn't improve after Antinous' death, and his sickness plagued him for the rest of his life. Hadrian was absolutely overcome with grief and had Antinous immediately deified without asking permission from the Senate, which was completely unheard of at the time. Hadrian then ordered that the city of Antinopolis be built on the bank of the Nile where Antinous had drowned. And around 2,000 marble statues of Hadrian's beloved appeared across the empire, which at the time made him the most sculpted person in human history. Out of the 2,000 originals, over 100 statues and busts of Antinous survive into the modern day. To put that number into perspective, that is more than 5 times the amount of contemporary statues we have of Julius Caesar. After he was deified, Antinous was seen as a god of healing and compassion, and as he was once human, worshippers believed that he answered prayers quicker than gods who had never been mortal. The cult of Antinous became more and more popular across the Roman Empire, and at one point it was seen as a main rival even to Christianity. The cult of Antinous still existed well into the 4th century AD, but at this point it did start to come under fire. Firstly, pagan worshippers rejected the cult because they said there was no proof that Antinous actually became a god upon his death. Meanwhile, Christians claimed that the cult of Antinous promoted immorality, as Antinous was homosexual. Worship of Antinous was officially outlawed by Theodosius I in 391 AD, but statues of Antinous can still be seen alongside the great Roman emperors in museums all across the world to this day. Although there are a lot of questions about the circumstances and the causes of Antinous' death, there is no disputing the impact it had on Hadrian. The grief-stricken emperor was never truly the same after the death of his beloved, and all of that anger and grief found a place to be vented in 132 AD. In a moment that arguably still affects global geopolitics to this day, the Jews once again revolted against the Romans to start the Bar Kokhba Revolt. The Bar Kokhba Revolt wasn't an isolated incident though, and it was more of a continuation from other conflicts that started during Trajan's reign, such as the previously mentioned Kittos War. And this revolt led by Simon Bar Kokhba had several causes. These included the harsh treatment of Jews within the Roman Empire following the defeat of the Diaspora Revolt, as well as Hadrian's plans to rebuild Jerusalem as a Roman colony. But the spark that started the fire was likely Hadrian's decision to build a temple to Jupiter on the site of the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. So the Jews rose up and Judea was in revolt once again, but the interesting part is what happened next. Hadrian was initially far less hostile towards the Jews than his predecessors, but it's believed that a man named Tacitus swayed him into taking a more aggressive attitude by appealing to his love of ancient Greek culture. The Bar Kokhba Revolt dragged on for 3 years, and suppressing the rebellion became Hadrian's top priority. He even made the decision to remove the famed military general Sextus Severus from his position as governor of Britannia so he could help stop the rebellion in Judea. This was an unusual decision because not only is Judea a much smaller province than Britannia, but Britannia was also considered far more important to Roman interests. So moving the governor of Britannia to Judea shows how desperate Hadrian was to stop this rebellion. But the decisive blow came in 135 AD, when Roman forces retook the city of Ptah and killed the rebellion leader Simon Bar Kokhba. With that, the Roman army crushed the Jewish rebellion, and over 500,000 Jews were killed either during the conflict or as a direct consequence of the conflict. The consequences for Judea were extreme, as Hadrian ordered a massacre of the people that lived there, an act that many modern historians now consider to be a genocide. The Jews were also banned from entering Jerusalem, and Judea was renamed Syria Palestina. Meanwhile, the Jewish demographic in the region more or less collapsed overnight. Cassius Dio estimated that nearly 1,000 Jewish villages in Judea were destroyed. 2/3 of the Jewish population was killed during the revolt, and many of the survivors were enslaved. Plus, Hadrian banned the Hebrew calendar and banned the study of the Hebrew Bible. Dozens of sacred Jewish texts were publicly burned, and almost all of the Hebrew sages in the region were executed. It was a brutal result that sent a jarring message to the rest of the empire. Do not mess with Hadrian. The Bar Kokhba Revolt was a dark stain on Hadrian's legacy. Whether he acted so harshly out of grief for the loss of Antinous, or out of anger at the Jewish people rejecting his temple to Jupiter, the damage had been done either way. Not only did his handling of the Bar Kokhba Revolt completely shatter his reputation as a fair and peaceful ruler, but the victory also came at a massive cost of Roman lives. It's estimated that 2 entire legions could have been wiped out in the conflict, and one other sustained extremely heavy casualties. The loss of soldiers during the conflict was so heavy that when Hadrian addressed the Senate following the victory, he refused to say the usual greeting, "If you and your children are healthy, it is well. I and the legions are healthy." According to Cassius Dio, this is the only time in Hadrian's entire reign where he refused to say this. The last few years of Hadrian's life were far from ideal. His health continued to deteriorate, and the issue of succession became far more obvious. With no biological sons, or biological children at all for that matter, Hadrian was forced to adopt, much like Trajan had done with him several years before. But he made the controversial decision of adopting a man called Aelius Caesar to be his son, who was a bit of a left field pick, to be honest. Aelius Caesar was a bit of an odd pick because he had never held any high-ranking military positions or high-ranking diplomatic positions which would make him seem fit to rule. Because of this, Aelius Caesar was seen as a weak choice to succeed Hadrian, but it got even worse when Aelius Caesar died of illness in 138 AD. At this point, Hadrian himself only had months left to live, which meant he had to pick another successor while his own health was rapidly deteriorating. He chose to adopt Antinous Pius as his son, but only on the condition that Pius would adopt Marcus Aurelius as his son to assure there was more than one generation of succession. Hadrian eventually succumbed to his illness and died on the 10th of July 138 AD, aged 62. In spite of the Bar Kokhba Revolt and his shady succession, Hadrian was idolised by his contemporaries and considered one of Rome's great emperors. Hadrian was laid to rest alongside his adopted son and also his wife, which he probably wasn't too happy about, and I'm sure I've mentioned why at this point. Hadrian was hailed for his stability and his efforts to improve the lives of everyday people, while also ensuring the sustainability of the empire for several generations to come. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, the line of succession dictated by Hadrian came to an end, and the Roman Empire arguably never achieved the same level of stability again. So there's a lot more to Hadrian than just being an emperor who built a wall. He is arguably among the most consequential rulers of the Roman Empire, and unlike others who seem to get more credit than him, the scars he left on the world are still very visible to this day. And with that, the life story of Emperor Hadrian comes to an end. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've certainly enjoyed making it and writing it. Like I said, there will be a lot more videos like this appearing on the channel because this is going to be a very long and hopefully very successful series. And I'm planning to do a lot more adventurous videos in the future. So if this is something you enjoyed, then please make sure you like and subscribe and stick around for the rest of the episodes, and hopefully I'll see you in the future.